Over the weekend, Dontrez Styles became the third Tar Heel to enter the transfer portal. What does this mean for next year's roster, and who is Hubert Davis going to find to replace him?
You are Locked On Tar Heels, your daily podcast on the UNC Tar Heels, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey there, it's Monday, March 20th, 2023. Welcome into the Locked On Tar Heels podcast, the only daily North Carolina show out there. I'm your host, Isaac Shade, coming to you from Birmingham, Alabama, from my friend's house, where we've seen some great basketball take place this weekend. We really want to thank you for making our show your first listen or watch of the day. Coming up on today's show, we're going to take a look at recruiting, both some transfer targets as well as things going on in the high school ranks, celebrate the women's basketball victory over the weekend, and we've got a terrible take from somebody about the Duke-Carolina rivalry. But first, let's look at this Dontrez Styles transfer news that came out on Friday. We already knew, like in the immediate aftermath of Carolina not playing in the NIT, we found out last week that Tyler Nickel and Justin McKoy would be transferring. But then on Friday, we got the news about Styles, and let's be honest, we all expected this last offseason ahead of this year. And quite frankly, it was a surprise that he came back to play for Carolina in 2022-23. And his role didn't change, his minutes didn't change. And so this is probably the least shocking result to me of the entire offseason. But you never know until it actually happens. And now it has happened. So there are 3 Tar Heels that have left. And again, folks, no need to get worried or bent out of shape. This is the landscape of college sports now. It's happening all over the nation in basketball, football, you name it. This is collegiate free agency. This is what's happening. So what it means, I'm not going to put the chart up for you today as I've done with the scholarship count and the scholarship quota, but let me talk us through it. Carolina would have already had 1 available scholarship for next season in the transfer market. But with Nickel and McKoy leaving last week, that gives Carolina 3 open scholarships. And now the Styles news means that there are 4 open scholarships that Coach Davis and the staff can fill. We'll look at some of those targets here in just a second. So that means that there are 9 players currently remaining on the roster. Let me talk you through them by class, and then we'll look at it positionally as we continue to think about, hey, what do the Tar Heels need to really fill out the roster? So by class, the 9 currently remaining, the upcoming seniors are Caleb Love, RJ Davis, and Puff Johnson. There's just 1 junior now, and that's DeMarco Dunn, given the Styles transfer news. 3 upcoming sophomores, Jalen Washington, Seth Trimble, and Will Shaver. And then the incoming freshman class of Simeon Wilcher and Zayden High. And so as you look at that, when you break it down positionally, because that's where you really want to start to look at things, is not only how do we fill things out, how much eligibility do they have left, but also positionally, what does Hubert Davis have available to him? And right now, it's the backcourt that is pretty full and loaded still, while the wings and the front court position are potentially a little bit cupboard bare, as we would say it. So in the backcourt right now, you have Caleb Love, RJ Davis, DeMarco Dunn, Seth Trimble, and Simeon Wilcher coming in. Those 5 guys. Now, obviously, we will still be watching out for, listening for any news on any of those, from Caleb to RJ, DeMarco, Seth, right? In this day and age, you're expecting news one way or the other at some point. Remember, there's a 60-day transfer portal window that will run through around May 11th, if I've figured out how to count correctly on the calendar. So you're still waiting on that news. But right now, you have a backcourt that's got 5 rotation pieces in it. At the wing, right now, you have Puff Johnson and Zayden High. High could really be a 3 or a little bit of an undersized 4, just depending on what sort of lineup Coach Davis is going with. And then the front court is probably the most barren right now, where it's just Jalen Washington and Will Shaver. And remember, Will Shaver is going to be coming off of injury. Already was even questionable if he is ready yet from a skill standpoint to give any level of contribution or serious minutes in the rotation for the Tar Heels. I don't expect him to, but you never know. We'll see what that offseason development is. So right now, it's really the Jalen Washington show, and that's it in the front court. So there are the 9 that you have. Obviously, as you see that, Carolina's going to go need to fill out both the wing and the front court positions. And so we'll keep our eyes on that. And then obviously, if there's some attrition in the backcourt, if Caleb or RJ or DeMarco or Seth, any of these guys could leave. If any of them do, obviously Carolina is going to want to fill that out as well. Now, keep in mind, one puzzle piece that we don't know yet is that Armando Bacot does have that 5th year he could use with his COVID eligibility. And I think for many, the foregone conclusion is that he will move on. But a great example of this is Gonzaga's Drew Timme, who ultimately recognized, listen, I'm not going to get drafted in the NBA draft. I could go professional, not get drafted and play in the G League or overseas somewhere. But under NIL rules, I'm going to make more money playing at Gonzaga. I'm going to be able to raise my profile higher by playing on national TV 35 times for Mark Few and the Bulldogs, instead of playing in front of maybe a couple hundred in a G League game or whatever it would be. My friend's house, who I'm staying at in Birmingham right now, we were joking because somebody gave him 6 tickets to the Birmingham G League game the other day because they're just trying to get people in the stands. And so you contrast that with Armando, if he chooses to stay in Chapel Hill, playing 35 games a year on national TV, being one of the most recognized faces in the entire sport, and not to mention his endorsements just keep piling up. And so, I would not be shocked in any way if Armando decides to stay, but we just don't know yet. Obviously the minutes would be there. It would probably be a starting front court of he and Jalen Washington, but we got a lot of time to figure that out. But obviously we'll be talking about it a lot because, as Coach Pat Kilby has said in some of our text exchanges this week, it really feels like we're at a crossroads moment with the Hubert Davis era of getting things cemented and figuring it out. The problem is, in the transfer portal era, it's so much harder to build a program because of the constant roster flux. It's more just building year to year, and that's what we'll be watching for. So plenty more to come as we look ahead. Now, we do want to look at some of these recruiting updates. Who might Carolina be targeting to start bringing in? Because there's a lot of scholarships to fill up. We're going to talk about that in just a moment. But first, this episode is brought to you by Built Bar. The Built Bar March Madness bracket is here. We know you have a favorite bar or puff, and now's your time to make it count. Go to BuiltMarchMadness.com to vote for your favorites. I'm going to be voting for the Churro Bar because it is awesome. And when you vote for your favorite bar or puff, you'll be entered into a drawing where 50 lucky Locked On listeners will get a free box of Built Bars. Not only that, but one Locked On fan will win a full 12-month subscription to Built to have Built's best bars or puffs delivered monthly straight to your door. You got to try Built. It's the best protein bar ever. Seriously, it's so amazing. You won't think they're good for you, but they are. And why are they so good? Well, they are high in protein, low in sugar, and covered in 100% real chocolate. So run to BuiltMarchMadness.com right now to vote for your favorite bar or puff and pick up a box while you're there. You can vote every day in March, so hop in and support your pick. Built Bar, a proud sponsor of the Locked On Network. All right, folks, let's dive into some recruiting. We just talked about the shape of the roster as it stands right now for next season, but you want to start looking at, okay, how is Hubert Davis and the staff going to fill this out? A couple things to keep in mind. In this day and age, you are not only looking at high school recruits, you are looking at transfer recruits. And that means, it could be anything from recruiting at the high major level, which is the easiest thing because you've already seen them against that level of competition. It could be recruiting from a mid or low major school, which you always wonder about them being able to level up and play at that level, whether it's, from whatever, right? Like Justin Pierce from William and Mary or Christian Keeling from Charleston Southern a couple years ago. That was just a tough transition for those guys coming up to the ACC level. And then, you've got JUCO possibilities, you've got Division II possibilities. You just never know. And in this day and age, you got to look all across the board. Here's the other thing. You also have to continually re-recruit the guys already on your roster because of how easy it is to leave. There's not this thing of where guys are going to stay and work it out because they know that if they transfer, they got to sit out a year. That's just not the reality of things anymore. So there's a couple of updates for you. Let me start with the high school ranks because it's one where Carolina struck out as we expected with Trentyn Flowers, who announced on Friday that he was choosing Louisville. And not only that, but he was going to reclassify from 2024 up to 2023. This was the expectation. It's not a surprise. Carolina already has this very full 24 class and are heavily pursuing Jarin Stevenson, who has my vote as hopefully who Carolina will be able to land to round out that class. However, given everything, I was hopeful that maybe there was an outside chance the Tar Heels could land Flowers, who would reclassify into 23 because he is a small forward. And as we just talked about, Carolina has minutes available there at the small forward position. I mean, think about it. If Puff Johnson continues to be hurt, if Zayden High doesn't acclimate quickly, you want to have some diversity of someone who might be able to step in and really contribute right away there. But unfortunately, Flowers chooses Louisville. And by the way, the Cardinals, even after a historically bad season this year, are loading up right now. They recently got Illinois transfer Sky Clark and like a top 40 center in the class of 23 in Dennis Evans. And so hopefully they'll be able to turn that around because let's be honest, college basketball, ACC basketball is better when Louisville is better. That's part of what drug down the conference this year and caused them to be rated like below the Mountain West at KenPom and in other places. So this is good for basketball. This is good for the ACC. Now, you might be asking, how on earth is Louisville doing that right now? Listen, all you got to do is sell this storyline in your recruiting pitch. Hey, you saw how bad we were this year, right? How could you not? Come help us turn this thing around immediately because that's what you can do in the transfer portal era. Look at what Kansas State did this year. Look at what Missouri did this year under Dennis Gates in his first season. It's highly possible. So congrats to Louisville on making those pulls. Now, let's look at the transfer portal and here are just a few of the names that Carolina is pursuing. Last week, we talked about Nick Timberlake, who is in the transfer portal from Towson. Carolina seems to be pretty heavily interested in him. Of the two guys we talked about last week, he was the one that I think would be a better fit based on his skill set and what Carolina needs. And so I'm really curious to see how this recruitment progresses. He is a 6'4" guard, capable of shooting well from deep, and that's what the Tar Heels need. Shooting, shooting, shooting. There is not an amount of shooting that is enough shooting. And so keep in mind, this is one of the reasons Hubert Davis said, I don't want to play in the NIT because I want to get immediately into preparing for next season so that what happened this year doesn't happen again. If you're playing in the NIT, it's much more difficult to hit the recruiting trail and find out what's there and start establishing relationships with these guys because it is a microwave recruitment process as compared to the crock pot of high school recruiting, if you'll allow me that analogy. Like Brady Manek. I mean, it's a phone call and he's coming, right? And so Hubert Davis's ability as a recruiter, we all know how great it is. And he wants to spend that time and really feels like he's able to get to know both the kids and their families. And so hopefully that's what he's able to do. And so Carolina and Ohio State both will be conducting in-home visits with Timberlake and his family this week. So obviously we'll find out more about that, hear how it went, and discuss that on the show. And it's interesting, both Carolina and Ohio State teams that had some high expectations and hopes this year that just weren't able to fulfill those. So we'll keep our eyes on that. A new name has popped up, and that is Florida transfer Koasi Reeves, who played his first 2 years of school at Florida and is transferring out. He's a 6'6" guard, although I would call him more of a wing. So think of him like as a 3. Here's my, before we even talk about him or spend much time on it, he's a career 29% three-point shooter. We just talked about Carolina needs shooting. And so I think it's great to express interest in him. You want to do your due diligence, right? Like is that 2-year sample size real, or is it just he's not done well, but it projects that he'll shoot better? Sure, explore it, but you need shooting. And so I don't think this is who you want at your 3. You need to go get, because that's not Puff Johnson's game. Right? He is going to hit some threes here and there, but it's not going to be high volume, and it's not going to be 35 to 40%. So that's where I'm at with it. So that gets us up to date with where the recruiting things are at right now. Before we move on, let's celebrate with Carolina women's basketball, who won their opening round game 61-59 over St. John's, who was an 11 seed play-in winner. And this game was exactly what we mean by survive and advance. Carolina was down 5 to St. John's at one point, down 3 with around 2 minutes to go before Paulina Paris, the lone freshman on this roster. And we go back to all that experience she's had because of some injuries. It paid off in this moment precisely. She gets an and one to knot things up at 54 with 1:59 to go. Carolina keeps pushing the team's trade baskets back and forth. But then Deja Kelly gets her own and one with just a couple seconds left to give Carolina a 61-58 lead. Seems like things are in hand, but then she fouls a member of St. John's, Danielle Patterson, who gets 3 shots to tie things up and send it to overtime. Thankfully, Patterson misses the first 2, and Carolina escapes 61-59. It is the 50th win in program history for the Lady Heels in the NCAA tournament. Congrats. Courtney Banghart continues to move this program forward. Congrats also to Alyssa Utsby, who scored 13 points, crossed the 1,000-point threshold, becomes the 40th Lady Tar Heel to do so, and not to mention that it was on her birthday. So happy birthday, Alyssa Utsby. So great to have you back from injury, and glad the Tar Heels are moving on. Up next, though, Carolina has to repeat what they did last year in the NCAA tournament. They will be playing Ohio State, 4 p.m. Eastern this afternoon on ESPN in Ohio State's home building. And you remember last year, Carolina had to go to Arizona and do the exact same thing in the round of 32, won that game pretty handily, honestly. Can they repeat that this year? We will find out later on this afternoon. We'll all be tuned in to that. Well, Duke, as you are very well aware if you were watching the show, lost on Saturday. There's been some crossfire going on Twitter about it, and for some reason, Carolina got drug into this, taking some strays in the midst of it. I've got some thoughts on it, and I'm sure you do too. We'll discuss that in just a second. But first, this episode is brought to you by FanDuel. The tournament is heating up, and now's the perfect time to download FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook, because new customers get a no-sweat first bet up to $1,000. That's bonus bets back if your first bet doesn't win. So download the FanDuel Sportsbook app right now. It's safe, secure, and super easy to use. And then you can bet on everything from the money line to point scores and three-pointers drained. So make sure you check out all the lines for this weekend's Sweet 16 games. Plus, FanDuel even lets you combine your bets for a chance at a bigger payout with a same-game parlay. So don't miss the chance to get your no-sweat first bet up to $1,000 in bonus bets when you go to FanDuel.com/lockedon. That's FanDuel.com/lockedon to learn all about it. Make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sports betting partner of the NBA. Okay, folks, Duke, as you well know, has been on an absolute tear recently. They've gotten healthy. They've been looking good. And listen, very honestly, and I know people aren't going to love to hear this, I had them in my Elite Eight because the path in front of them looked like it played out well. Tennessee, who they lost to on Saturday, has been up and down all season. Elite defense, but their offense, you just can't trust it. And oh, by the way, they lost their offensive leader, Zakai Ziegler, to a season-ending injury just a couple weeks ago. So you look at this game and you say, Duke should kind of have this one pretty easily. But honestly, Tennessee just did work. That defense was dominant and frustrating for Duke, who, by the way, we should mention was without Mark Mitchell, who suffered an injury on Friday. Injuries have played a massive role in this year's tournament, but Duke loses, and obviously North Carolina fans everywhere celebrate. because that's what you do when Duke loses. When Duke's done in the tournament, it's like you want Carolina to win and or you want Duke to lose, and you can be content when one or both of those things happen. And the same is true for Duke, right? It's just part of what makes a rivalry awesome. You cheer for your team, you cheer for whoever's playing the other team. And so Carolina has had this like long-standing distaste for Rick Barnes, but on Saturday, he certainly was a Carolina hero, helping, restore some of that. But here's something that happened. B-Dot, the in-game arena host for Carolina and the sixth man of the Tar Heels, was just like celebrating Duke losing, celebrating them flying home to Raleigh-Durham. And Josh Graham, who is a local radio guy that covers all the teams in the area, takes to Twitter and quote tweets B-Dot's tweet. And he says this, and I quote, "After missing the tournament, UNC fans are celebrating and flexing after their rival gets eliminated. Over the last year, we've watched them slowly transform into NC State fans right before our eyes." You kidding me with this? Really? This is just flat out a bad take. We really going to act like Duke wasn't doing the exact same thing after Carolina won the national championship last year, or lost the national championship last year? Because let's be honest, I've already said it. Every Duke fan celebrates every UNC loss. Every UNC fan celebrates every Duke loss. But let's be specific. Let's not act, again, like Duke wasn't going crazy after Carolina lost that national championship. You saw it all over Twitter. You probably heard it from your friends and family and coworkers who are Duke fans. But let's remember, that was right after, literally 2 days after Duke had been sent home by, remind me again who it was? Oh, yes, the Tar Heels. Right after Coach K's career had been ended by, who was it? Oh, yes, the Tar Heels. You're telling me Duke fans weren't celebrating right after Kansas won the national championship last year? Oh, I know they were. I saw it. People sent it to me. And let's not act like Duke wasn't celebrating with UNC not making the tournament last Sunday. You know they were. You saw it. You heard it. And so why on earth are you coming with this take that because Carolina celebrates Duke ending their season, falling out of the tournament, that suddenly they're NC State fans? Bro, this is a desperate attempt to get Twitter engagement and activity. And it's so transparently what it is. So yes, of course, North Carolina is celebrating Duke being sent home. It's what makes the rivalry great. The best college basketball days, I'm sure this is how you feel internally, are when Carolina wins and or when Duke loses. And again, I'm going to keep saying this. Duke feels the exact same way. That doesn't turn you into a wolf puppy or a Wolfpack fan. It's just part of the rivalry. I don't understand why we have to do this. Why can't we just enjoy that? That's what makes things awesome. Let's celebrate when our bitter arch rival loses. We don't need Josh Graham inserting himself as the arbiter of the rivalry. No, it's plenty fine without you or anyone else trying to say things like this. And I know Josh Graham does a great job and there's all sorts of stuff. And I know that he and B-Dot have this interesting relationship. And so it's weird and odd. But hey, Carolina fans, you keep celebrating that Duke lost, and we'll do it all over again next year when there's a new crop of Duke players and several new Carolina players, but many old as well. This new rivalry with having two brand new coaches leading these programs is alive and well, and it's going to be fun for years and decades to come. And I can't wait to see what next year's editions of it hold. Duke, sorry, not sorry that you got sent home. Folks, that's it for Monday's episode of Locked On Tar Heels. Can't wait to be with you again tomorrow. Please don't forget to leave a review on Apple Music or anywhere else you listen to podcasts. You can follow the show on Twitter at Locked On Heels. You can follow me at Isaac Shade. Would love for you to email the show, lockedontarheels@gmail.com. Lots of you send in just great emails where we have further conversation back and forth. Please never hesitate to do that. Also, submit nominations for your heel of the week. Yay! And your heel of the week. Boo. And don't forget to subscribe, smash the like button, and leave some comments on your thoughts on who Carolina will bring in the transfer market and on this whole weird Duke thing. For your next listen, check out Locked On's brand new podcast, Locked On College Basketball, where myself and Andy Patton bring you everything you need to know on and off the court from around the college basketball landscape. Locked On College Basketball, available on YouTube and wherever you get podcasts. Folks, thanks so much for spending part of your Monday hanging out with me, talking Carolina sports. Want to remind you that it's always a great day to be a Tar Heel. Until tomorrow, peace!